keep doing daily videos on YouTube, I need to raise my Patreon and Subscribe Star income to a grand total of $200 a month. So if you're so inclined, help a chap out. Zang. Hello lovelies, today we're going to talk about Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology book. It's not a gaming book for once, and I'm not entirely sure where you would file this exactly. It's a retelling of some of the Norse myths. Some of my favourite ones are missing a bit, but it's in a more modern and accessible style. You know, Gaiman is a rather masterful storyteller in various media, and that definitely comes through in this. Now, I recently waded through the prose edda, well, not that recently, but relatively recently, and that was hard going. Not as hard going as going through ancient Welsh myths, but it was still hard going. If you want an accessible entry to Norse mythology, then I would say that this is a good starting point. And then if you want to work back from that into the prose edda, there are various translations, some more accessible than others, but this is more of a retelling than a direct translation. I didn't spot any particularly egregious mistakes or anything, but as you make something more accessible, as you make something more modern, you do miss some of the nuance, and there aren't really any footnotes or explanations of the culture such as you'd get in a more academic work, I suppose. So there's the prose edda, there's the poetic edda, and something like this is useful for getting you into this. Now, I've long had an interest in pre-Christian Europe, starting with the Celts, moving on to the Norse, and then more into the Finno-Ugric myths. This is Ukko's axe, sometimes a sword. Not because I believe any of it. I'm not into Asatru or any of that sort of ancient paganism or anything, but just because it's before the Romans came, really. It's our last gasp of truly aboriginal cultures across Europe, and very pantheistic, which made it easier to assimilate with the Romans in a lot of ways, because they were still pantheistic, at least at the start, because you had that point of commonality in both the way you approached gods as beings to petition or to ward off, to buy off their wrath, that sort of thing. And they were very human and much more relatable, and choosing which god you chose to venerate was kind of like having a star sign, but one that you chose, you know. And there were similar gods in all the different pantheons because the arenas of human experience were much more similar. So, oh, you have a god of thunder, we have a god of thunder as well. Oh, they're remarkably similar. And in fact, variations on Norse mythology are to be found across Europe, into Eastern Europe, even into the closer parts of Asia, certainly. And Norse influence on British mythology is very strong, as is Celtic influence. Less so the Finno-Ugric stuff, but I find that particularly fascinating as a pre-Christian culture, particularly the sort of shamanic traditions in northern Finland, because they've been preserved to an extent that they haven't in other places. And Tolkien based a lot of his lore for the Lord of the Rings and the languages, particularly Elvish, on Finnish myth and Finnish language and so on. There's a concept in Finnish myth of sort of singing and speaking things into life, and then when you look at Tom Bombadil and Tolkien's, some people don't like it, his sort of fixation upon song and poem, and the slightly sort of camp nature of Tom Bombadil, but it fits if you understand where he's getting it from. Of course, he was also influenced by Norse mythology and Celtic mythology and so on as well. And these are all reasons why recent criticisms of Tolkien as racist or whatever kind of fall apart when you look at what he was drawing on, as well as his experiences of the First World War. But yeah, there's a problem with being into this stuff in that people assume that you're somehow some sort of white supremacist because you're interested in Norse mythology or whatever else. So the racists assume you're a fellow racist, and the anti-racists assume that you're a fascist. And my contrarian nature means that I just, it makes me want to get deeper into the stuff. I don't think Odin would be terribly impressed with white supremacists. Loki is a savior as much as he's a problem maker, and he went off and had it away with giants and animals and all kinds of things. So clearly the Norse gods were not especially closed-minded. Anyway, it's just a long-winded way of saying that I'm interested in this stuff for various reasons, none of which are anything to do with white supremacy or originalism or whatever else. But I do think it's a shame that these cultures, these traditions, these stories have been lost to an extent. We only really know them in the vaguest of senses. So anything that makes them more modern and more accessible has got to be worth checking out. And while it's not by any stretch the best of Gaiman's work, I think it is worth a read if you're interested in that, but you find yourself intimidated by the translations of the Prose Edda or whatever else it might be. I hope he takes a similar approach to some other stories that are kind of being lost, like the Finno-Ugric myths. I think those would be fascinating to see Gaiman's accessible approach to. Anansi stories, he's incorporated some of these gods and beings and so on into his other work. I guess he'd get accused of cultural appropriation for doing that, but modernising and preserving the stories has to be a worthwhile goal, and you're going to need to have to do that every generation or so. And not bad, not brilliant. I don't know why, but maybe he felt a sense of responsibility, or something was holding him back, but it doesn't quite have the flair and panache of his other stories. Perhaps because his own creativity was hemmed in a bit. But if you want a modern, easily accessible retelling of Norse mythology, not a bad read. Zang. Tal, friend, and welcome to Gore. Savage and beautiful, John Norman's Gorean saga is brought to life in the Tales of Gore role-playing game and its companion world book, World of Gore. Take flight on a tarn, luxuriate in the bathhouses of Ar, pit your steel against the deadly curry, best your enemies and place them in your collar. Tales of Gore uses the D6 system, perfect for both new and old players. You can purchase it from Amazon, RPG Now, or Lulu.com. Ta Sada Gore.